Greetings and welcome. Thank you for joining me today. This is my first non-writing related video. It kind of hits the sweet spot between creativity and disability justice, and that's kind of where I want to be in this space. So the image is of a party of people from probably Dungeons and Dragons, but the main focus is on a character with red hair and elf ears who is sitting in a wheelchair that looks like it's made out of metal and wood tires, don't ask. And she is wearing a purple robe with a lavender bodice and is casting a ball of purple light in her hand. And the image is AI, but the text above it says, accepting the existence of magic in a fantasy setting should not be easier than accepting the existence of disabled people in a fantasy setting, which is true, shouldn't be controversial. But every time someone brings up the battle wheelchair, which will be our topic today, in tabletop RPGs and especially Dungeons and Dragons, or D&D as they call it, people have thoughts and feelings. And of course, most of them happen to be not disabled. So I want to look at the discourse that was going around on Twitter, look at some of our arguments, see what they boil down to, and see how it goes. So our first argument is, why play a wheelchair user? The two text boxes above say, why would I want a character in a fantasy game whose greatest enemy and challenge is a flight of stairs? And the second one says, imagine a fantasy setting and the literal first thing you don't fantasize about is getting out of the wheelchair. So my response to that is going to be, why do it? It's a chance to play a person like yourself and have adventures. For those of us disabled people who've played tabletop RPGs throughout our lives, we've hardly ever, if ever, been given a chance to play someone in a wheelchair, an orc with crutches, someone with a cane. It hasn't happened. You're this amazing specimen, and yes, when you are an adventurer, you are supposed to be the cream of the crop. But it's always kind of been an unwritten, unspoken taboo, because it always has to be that unless you have sight from the gods and you're blind, so you're not really visually impaired anymore, that you are going to be able-bodied, you are going to be 1000% without any mental illness, and maybe with the battle wheelchair, it's a step for you to be able to actually play a version of yourself that isn't just sitting around a table. Maybe it's a version of yourself that can have adventures too. Or it could be to create a character with new challenges. Maybe you have a sibling who has always supported you, and maybe they want, alongside of you, want to play a wheelchair user too. So maybe they want to jump in a wheelchair with you. What is wrong with that? It's not like they're taking representation away from us like you would see an able-bodied actor play a disabled role. This is just for fun. It's just in an enclosed setting to just explore and have fun. Also, the wheelchair, it can be cool. A lot of people are talking about it as starter equipment because it's fairly cheap. And for those of you who don't play tabletop RPGs, when you first start out, you only have a certain amount of gold to buy your starting equipment. And for the stats, the wheelchair has some really amazing durability and whatnot that most people don't see in beginner's equipment. So some people even say it's OP or overpowered. Or to create a more realistic world would be the last argument I have here. I mean, you're allowing centaurs out into the world, and demons, and dwarves, and green men, purple men, people shooting lightning out of their fingertips, but, no wheelchairs, I guess, right? So if you want a more viable world where everything is vibrant and everything kind of aligns more, then you would think that people who are disabled, and it should go further than a wheelchair, are part of that. So the next slide has 3 text boxes. The first one says, representation doesn't matter. It's egotistical. The second box says, the whole notion that fiction should quote-unquote challenge your political beliefs is absolutely ridiculous. It should be about escape, not indoctrination. No one is buying this woke fantasy crap. The third one says, again, Why do you want to play a disabled character when you could fantasize that you aren't? It's because you have made victimhood your identity. Without your disability, you have no character. So I just put on the bottom, representation is ridiculous, because that is the crux of this argument. So, on representation, I have a couple questions here. But why is it political to be a minority? It's not political when you're a white man. It's not political when you're a cis-het white man or Christian white man. Why does it suddenly come political when you're black, disabled, queer, etc.? Why is it political to exist? It shouldn't be. An existence is not an agenda. My existence is not an agenda. Yours is not an agenda. We exist because we do. I didn't come out with any kind of political leaning one way or another. I just came into the world as I am. Everybody else says, oh, if you are represented or if you want equal rights, it becomes a political agenda. No, it's not. And it's only ever called that when someone who isn't white has that. So the second part says, should a white, cis-het, able-bodied man be forced to play someone nothing like him? I can't tell you how many people I've played D&D with, or I've seen D&D played, where the white man most of the time ends up being, shock, a white man. He's like the grand wizard human. Or maybe he's an elf, but he's an elf with like white skin and powers and or a big ass club and swinging it around. Sometimes he's an orc with green skin. But do you know how many times I've seen a man still play a man, a white man still play a white man, etc. So we don't ask them to play a different race. We don't ask them to play anything they don't want to play. So when that big group of white dudes sits down, and like the majority of them, some of them might switch to female or whatever, but the majority of them still play white dudes. And we never say, hey, you have to be disabled now. But yeah, when a disabled player sits down at a table, we're like, hey, guess what? You have to be able-bodied. Like, that is such crud. That is a double standard. Why aren't we making everybody play like purple aliens in D&D then? I mean, that would be fair, right? Also, I saw part of the representation argument be, oh, it's just the woke left who are able-bodied trying to get disabled people, like, get them brownie points or trying to make the world, like, worse somehow. And I just want to point out that the creator of the battle wheelchair, Mark Thompson, is actually a wheelchair user. So this whole people are trying to, like, force us into these boxes. It was somebody who was a disabled person who played tabletop role-playing games who said, hey, I would like to have some kind of adventure, maybe in a wheelchair for once. So there you go. It's not about forcing anybody or the agenda of the left. It's about having the option. So now we have the next argument. And it says, yeah, disabled characters exist. Thank you for acknowledging that that should be the case. That doesn't make the combat wheelchair good. And then the second one says, my gripe is just when you have all the choices laid out in front of you, from animal mount to spider chair to chariot pulled by penguins, wheelchair is the choice. So I boiled this down to, aren't there cooler alternatives than a plain wheelchair? And, you know, as a wheelchair user and as a D&D person for a long time, yeah, there are. I'm not arguing that, but on the fact that the wheelchairs are boring. No one said you can't use a mount, a flying carpet, a tensor disc, levitate in the air with your powers, whatever it is. No one said you cannot do that. The wheelchair is good starting equipment because remember we talked about that we only have so much gold, so much starting money for you to actually use on equipment, and that mount that's specialized in handling like the problems with you balancing or whatever your character may have as part of their disability is probably not going to come cheap. Yes, you could probably have a background story where, like, your grandfather gave you this dire wolf or something like that, and you were bonded, and it's been your partner this whole time. I get that. You could argue that. But for the most part, the alternatives aren't going to come cheap or easy. As a starting adventurer, as a starting mage, you're not going to have, like, the ultimate power of levitation or something that can, like, make you fly, like a bangle or something that's imbued with a certain type of spell. It's not going to be a starter equipment. So, and the third thing I want to bring up is, why can't the chair be augmented or tricked out? Why does it have to be a plain chair? You're telling me that you think, and we're going to talk about this in the next one, that a cure can happen for all disabled people because it's a world of magic. But your world of magic doesn't include, like, putting runes on the wheelchair tires so that they can go upstairs, or putting, like, stuff in the seat of the chair so you can literally, like, go across the water in your wheelchair. Why does it always have to be, oh, magic can do some things, but not that. Not make you, able to still be disabled in this world. Not that. We can cure you, but... And that's where we're going next. So, we have 3 text boxes. The first one says, just use magic to move your legs. The second one says, don't know, fantasy setting magic. Don't know why a cleric can't just cure the person's paralysis or inability to walk. It's a fantasy setting after all. And that's where I pause to go back to, then why can't we make a cool chair? Then why can't we do all this other stuff to the chair to make it tricked out and wonderful and an object that would be incredibly helpful? Maybe even better than your dang legs. Why can't the chair do that? The third one says, public service announcement. If your fantasy RPGs have a healing spell in the magic system, you need to have wheelchairs demonstrate something else, or you have wheelchairs demonstrate something else than you think. I think what they're trying to say is that you have a woke agenda if you have a healing spell, but yet people are disabled. So, can't a magic world have healing? Is really the crux of the next argument we're speaking of. And, okay, hold on. I did the wrong button. Hold on, thank you. Just magic it away. So, magic has limits. And what I mean by that is that every spell has stuff it can and cannot do. So, there is no cure-all. And why does the no cure-all thing matter? Because high-level if you are paralyzed, you acquired that disability, right? Most of the time, yes. I have cerebral palsy. Did I really acquire that stuff? Because I had it from the moment I was born. My sister had cerebral palsy pretty much from the moment of birth. Probably maybe a few minutes after, but let's not argue that kind of semantics. Some of us are born disabled. Some of us are born without limbs. Some of us are born blind, born deaf. So if something can get rid of, like, let's say you had a chariot accident when you were a kid, and even all these years later, someone can actually fix the fact that your one leg is, like, much shorter than the other and you can't really walk on it or whatever. Can you do the same thing to a person disabled from birth? And we'll get back to that in a second. So high-level healing is expensive and requires rare ingredients in Dungeons & Dragons. You can't just go to, like, a level, like, 30 cleric and say, yeah, heal me. You can't just do that. Magic always has a cost. It always has really difficult things. I'm not saying you cannot play an arc if you so wish, where you're a disabled character and the whole reason for your dang journey is to go and heal yourself. But most people actually would not want that journey. They would rather save the world or something rather than, not be deaf anymore. Some people would. I respect that. And I think that should be an option. But the thing is, a lot of DMs I saw in the comments, DM stands for Dungeon Master, sometimes called GM for Game Master, the person who designs the adventure and runs through it with the players. I heard a lot of them say, or saw them say, talk about it, that they would not allow certain things to happen. They would just be like, oh, you're cured. Oh, you have to do this or that. And I don't really understand that. They're arguing for one solution, the solution they want, but not any other way. So disabilities are varied. See, this is where I'm going back from. People disabled from birth might not be mended. Right. If a spell actually rewinds time to put you back to where you were, say at 5 years old, I already had cerebral palsy at 5 years old. Sorry, true story. Chronic pain, 5 years old, asthma, all of that. Same thing. I had that at 5 years old. So it's unlikely that if you find a cure from a spell, from anything else, that everything could be cured. That every single thing, because there are a variety of causes. Toxins, birth defects, accidents, just so many things can make you disabled. So, also, what happens to somebody who's neurodivergent? Neurodivergent people, like people with autism, there have been found to be genetic links. And even in utero, you're probably autistic if you're autistic. So how do you fix that? You don't. That's just part of the person. And then what if the cure is worse? What if the only option you would actually have in the fantasy setting is to bow down to an evil god? Like, yeah, I will fix your legs, you disabled person, you. Of course I will. But you must serve me in everything, and that means you must kill 10 children every full moon. I mean, a DM is the one who decides that, the game master, dungeon master. But overall, what happens if that is the case? I mean, do you take it just to be quote-unquote normal? That could be an interesting, moral dilemma for a character who has always wanted to be able-bodied or neurotypical or whatever, but yeah. The next argument is D&D doesn't have an accessible setting because it's in a medieval world. So they should represent people in wheelchairs realistically. Have them be defeated full stop by a flight of stairs. You encountered stairs, your quest is over. Okay, first part of this really can stop if you have the tricked out chair with the runes. Also, there are a lot of disabled wheelchair users that are not, I know, oxymoron probably, but hold on here. It's not temporary, but there are mobile wheelchair users that can actually ambulate on their own, at least for a short period of time. Maybe they can't do steps, maybe some of them can. I myself can crawl up and down steps. That's how I do it. That's how I've always done it. I can crawl around my apartment. That's how I get around when I'm not out in public. I need my wheelchair for public access because I can't crawl very far. But one flight of stairs will not stop me. Now 17, it will take me an awfully long time, but there are ways to go about it. And okay, so the second one says, so the same evil wizard that put in magic skeletons to defend his fortress is also going to put in a ramp with less than 1/8 slopes? Okay, you want to talk about that? Fine. You have a mage. You say the mage can get rid of disability. Why can't the mage turn the stairs into a ramp? Why can't the mage, or the barbarian with the huge hammer, knock out a frickin' wall and you find a different way through that way? Why can't there just be an access from the sewer into the castle? I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've read about medieval times where the wardrobe where the king sits to take his daily, let's say, constitutional, that's not the word I want to use, but he goes to the bathroom in the morning and he gets shanked because someone literally crawled up his bathroom wardrobe, his little bathroom closet, and stabbed him because back then it wasn't a sewer pipe. If you want to talk about medieval, we could go that way. I mean, yes, there is still a vertical ascent, but there are ways around certain things, and I think a lot of it is lack of imagination, but we'll talk about that a little more later. The last one said, some thieves take the wheelchair, boom, character is at immediate and permanent disadvantage. Not permanent disadvantage, because we've talked about this before. There are ways around it. Now is when you find the horse, maybe. But we talk about inaccessible settings. So next slide says, in a world with dragons and mystic machines, realism doesn't seem to have a priority. People want to argue my realism right now, but they don't care when there's a centaur holding a baby dragon. They want to talk realism when it comes to no disability or disabled people able to climb stairs or climb a mountain or whatever. But they don't seem to care when there's a half-demon lord summoning a god from the sky. They don't seem to care about my realism when that stuff is going on. So I demand crypt characters be cured when magic could easily be used for accessibility. Right, just make the stairs into a ramp, as I said. Tabletop RPGs often require problem solving. The reason why I put this here is because you will have a group of adventurers traveling where someone has a cursed sword. And that cursed sword, if you fail your dice roll, let's say under a 10, you wake up in the middle of the night and you want to kill one of the members of your party. And then they have to roll to make sure you don't kill them in their sleep. Like they woke up just in time or something. If we can have cursed objects that make things harder on the other adventurers, why is disability considered the not hard thing that they want to take on? Everybody in a group has pluses and minuses. Why is it considered that the minus of disability is worse than a bloodthirsty sword that wants you to kill people? So, this is just ableism. I'm going to put an ableism warning in the title of this video, because a lot of this is, but... okay, we're going to go through it. It said, don't worry, your character would be very useful as either target practice or in a human experiment. And then the second one just says, cripples in a fantasy setting only have one role, as its villains, as it should be. I gotta tell you, most of the time you don't even argue as its villains, but there's a lot to be said here. Because I've seen more than one person say that about, like, using the person in the wheelchair as goblin bait. Because, you know, helpless and luring them out. And you know what? If done right, that could absolutely be an option. Like using someone in a wheelchair who has like really strong magic. Oh no, I'm so defenseless. I can't even lift up this sword. And they have like a fire spell that'll just incinerate them on contact. Okay, that's an option. Definitely an option. You play to your strengths, right? And that's another thing. It's the preconceived notion of this. Why can't we turn that on its head? And then the disabled people as villains, because why? Because the sins of the father, because we're bitter. Because honestly, babe, we don't sound like the bitter ones here. All y'all commenters were having a bit of a go, and some of you said some pretty nasty things. So as far as like mad at the world and a chip on your shoulder, some of you have some problems. And this next slide is going to be even worse, so please bear with me. I didn't even put the worst ones here. And honestly, because of this, I saw a masculine presenting black person in a wheelchair climbing a rock wall because of all this stuff. So some good things happened from it. Because I had never seen somebody rock climb with a wheelchair. It was a very light manual chair so that it could actually be pulled up with the person as they were climbing. And I thought that was so amazing. So this last slide is a bit darker, so we're going to do this. There are 3 quotes in black with the squares or rectangles. First one says, "No, you're not." They're answering somebody here. And this one says more than just a game, by the way. Because if you were, you'd know that being crippled is not fun, not cool, and being represented is a stupid reason for trying to push your ego on other people's fun. It's not ego to be represented. Otherwise, I would demand every character at the table be named after me. I would love y'all to be Jennifer 1 through 10, okay? That would be amazing. Like, Jennifer 7, like, it's your turn now. Oh, and by the way, you have brown hair and green eyes and a banging body and everything else that comes with me, okay? But I don't. Because it's not ego to be represented. You give me every cishet male, Christian guy, white, of course, and I'm going to, for the next 3 years, give them movies, books, and games that have nobody that looks like them in it at all. No white people. no men. No, you get what I'm saying here. They would flip out. The majority of them would flip out. Absolutely flip. Over not being able to see themselves represented literally like 90% of the time. We all know this. So how is that our ego to just want the option for something for us? Not even something we have to take. And I got to tell you, I've played games before where I had the option to be disabled. And guess what? Sometimes I took it. Sometimes I didn't. It's an option. It's a game at the end of the day. It's a game. The second one says, no, we're not playing this, and I'm leaving it on the screen. I'm going to try not to swear too much. No, we're not playing this freaking game. You're broken people, and you're pushing an anti-culture that enables harming children or make them lame like their parents. No, I won't cite that for you, because I'm done justifying the truth to crazy people. All this needs to stop. I have no idea who hurt this person when, but it sounds like it was pretty deep. I have no idea. I tried to look for context to what this person was talking about. This was said just as the D&D discourse was happening. So I don't know if what they're talking about. I could not even begin to understand this. I think most people actually would prefer their children be more able-bodied and stuff, if only because it's so much more difficult to access things as a wheelchair user. It is so much more difficult to access things as a deaf person. It is so much more difficult for every difference. The more differences you have, the more difficult it is. And if y'all don't believe me, you can come to my hometown with my permission. We would talk about it. And I would show you all of the places I literally cannot get into in modern day America because the buildings are old and they don't have to be accessible for me. Modern day, right now. And I know you'll be like, oh, well, that's helping their argument about medieval times, but there are no magic things in this world. And the ADA is a very flawed freaking, I'm not even going there, but yeah, so I would say that most parents want their children to be able to go to any store they want, if possible. But I don't know. I guess you'll have to ask other parents for me, because I'm not a parent myself. I just know what my mom wanted. I just know what I would want if I had kids. So the third one says, yes, people should pull their own weight. How is that controversial? You're essentially saying other people owe you labor necessary to sustain you for free forever, no thanks. And at first, I thought this last one was dealing with Dungeons and Dragons itself. Because there were people making arguments for, oh, why would you wreck people's fun by having them carry you around? Or why would you do this where they would always have to be considerate of you? Well, shouldn't you just walk and therefore not be a burden and not stress anybody out, or not make it so that you're like one piece of equipment stolen from you away from being a useless party member? And I looked at the context of this, and this person is actually talking about us humans, not as a character around a table, but the players. So they were talking about disabled people literally in general. Us not pulling our own weight. Us, thinking people owe us labor. We contribute to society as well. Sometimes it's not in the way people expect. Like, not all of us have jobs that pay taxes, though actually many of us do. Many of us do pay taxes. Many of us do have an income besides like social welfare programs. And there is no shame if you need a social welfare program. You give in different ways. A person who doesn't have a job might be able to volunteer a couple times a month because that's all their pain will allow. That's fine. Some people take care of their children and are a stay-at-home parent as a disabled person. That is giving a lot to society. But of course, we don't talk about like the single parents or the disabled parents raising their children. We don't talk about how we might be caregivers to other disabled people or our own parents or things of that nature. Because a lot of us end up being some type of caregiver as well. My husband has autism. My husband is my caregiver. He is my unpaid caregiver. And that saves society a ton of money from having to, put me in a care home or even pay him for it. He does it for free. So there are a lot of ways that disabled people are quote unquote useful. But we have to go back to this, and I know some of you are shouting at the screen now. I'm worthy because I exist. I am able to be where I am because of some of the social programs we have, true. But you don't think I don't give back because I don't have a 9-to-5 job? You have a very, very narrow idea of success, and that has to do a lot about what society has told you success or giving back looks like. I am just as able to help my friends, just as able to get involved and help my community as anybody else. It doesn't always look like a pay stub at the end of the day. Sometimes it looks like helping out a fellow writer who is struggling and wants to quit, giving them the motivation to continue. Sometimes it's raising money by selling my book at the library to raise money for the damn library, which is under attack, by the way. A lot of your libraries are. But that's a different video altogether. But just because it doesn't look like anybody's helping doesn't mean they're not. But then again, nobody should really have to justify it for you. And nobody should have to justify why there's a wheelchair in a game that you can choose to use or not use. It's about choice. And why are we making games more boxed in? Aren't we always clamoring for the next big expansion, the next huge world, the next tweak to our stats? Isn't that what we always do? Why are we arguing against disability now? Oh yeah, that's right. It's because you're ableist.